So to begin, Lauren, I was going to ask if in just like a few sentences, and again, for that general audience, could you, state your name, tell people who you are, and talk about in brief sort of your experience and your expertise around chatbots?
Great. I'm Lauren Kunze, and I'm the CEO of Pandorabots, which is one of the largest chatbot development and hosting platforms in the world. Bots hosted on our platform have chatted with people over 100 billion times. And I'm also the founder and CEO of a spinout from Pandorabots called Iconic that's focused on AI influencers and conversational AI applications for consumers. I actually built my first chatbot when I was 15 years old, which is more than 20 years ago now. So I've lived through a number of different hype cycles and now technology breakthroughs in the field.
Thank you. That's great. Um, could you briefly describe the story of how the Alice chatbot of the 1990s connects into Pandorabots and your efforts in commercial chatbots?
Yes. So Pandorabots chief science officer and co-founder, Dr. Richard Wallace, is the inventor of an open standard scripting language called artificial intelligence markup language, which is how a large number of bots were hand authored in the 90s and early 2000s. And Alice is the name of a chatbot that he built by essentially reviewing conversations that people were having with this chatbot online and then handwriting updates to Alice's responses based on all the different types of inputs that people had. And he actually discovered that there were about 10,000 things that people would be very likely to say to chatbots in conversations. So if you hand authored 10,000 replies, you could have a pretty good conversational chatbot. And that represents months and months of work, which is a huge departure from the way that generative AI chatbots are built today, which is a couple of sentences of prompting. And because it was so much work, Richard decided to open source Alice. And he also released the language that she was written in as an open standard, meaning that anybody could take up this language and build a platform offering or application around it. So Pandorabots in its earliest phase actually began as an interactive web service where any developer or college student, and a lot of Stanford students and other university partners back in the day could log in and create their own bot using the open source Alice library to answer all of those general chit chat questions. Hi, hello, how are you? There are also some weird things in the top 10,000 inputs, like people say, I love you to chatbots a lot. People say less nice things a lot. So there are answers to cover all of those. And yeah, we gradually evolved the Alice framework into other open source frameworks, but that was a big basis for how many, many bots were built on the internet during that time. We at Pandorabots have had over 350,000 bots just built on our platform, but this open standard that Richard invented underlies other chatbot offerings all over the world, and we estimate there's probably about 1 million bots in the market at a minimum that use this underlying scripting language as the technology from the olden days. Again, I think going forward, we're going to see a lot more people building bots with generative AI because people are lazy and it's a lot faster.
Thank you. Um, Looping back to the importance of sort of the open source approach to, to the growth of Pandorabots and the proliferation of these chatbots made with it. Could you talk about that history of like open source versus proprietary approaches in the history of chatbots?
Wow. big question. Well, let me see. I'm trying to think about other open source offerings that have been big over the years. I think when a developer or an enterprise wants to build a chatbot, they have a choice to either build something from scratch or try to build a proprietary model or proprietary system, or they can use something open source in an open source library. I think for us, we had a lot of enterprise clients who liked the fact that there was no platform lock-in, and that their chatbot was portable, provided they built their own interpreter that could run it in-house. And I think one of the bigger components, which is more related to the question of a rule-based system versus a machine learning system, is that when you have a rule-based system, you can actually run a trace and you can understand very clearly through the code why the bot came up with the answer that it did, because it's hand scripted and there's a lot of control, so enterprises can always be sure it stays on brand. When machine learning started to enter the chat, for lack of a better word, after 2010, roughly, so sort of in the past decade before 2020, what we started to see is that these systems are more black boxes, and it's harder to understand why it came up with the answer that it did, which is actually a difference in a technical approach and not necessarily closed source versus open source, but is still one of the huge issues plaguing chatbots today. Where do they get their answers from, and are those answers on brand, and can we even check to see where that came from?
Thank you. I don't know if this is a fair or an unfair question, but could you describe the kind of like the most common type of chatbot that's actually out there deployed in the world, and what they do?
Yeah. So because Pandorabots is a platform where anyone can build a bot for any purpose, we've seen a ton of verticalized applications over the years. Customer service has always been a very popular, very obvious area where brands and businesses like to deploy a chatbot to reduce call center costs. And it's actually funny because even though this is a very popular deployment, historically, before the technology got as good as it was today, it was something that we would sometimes discourage because a poorly written chatbot, and we've all had those experiences, right? Plus, press 1 if you didn't understand me, press 2 to repeat, et cetera, actually makes customers angrier a lot of the time, which has been a huge shift with recent advances in technology. It's actually much easier now to build a much higher quality customer service bot. But we also saw a lot of applications in what I class as the engagement side of the space. So in customer service, the goal of the bot is to keep the conversation as brief as possible and to solve the person's problem as best as possible. In the engagement side of the spectrum, the goal of the bot is to keep the conversation going as long as possible, whether they're entertaining the user or they're trying to teach them something or they're an NPC in a game. So we had a lot of NPC applications. We had bots running around in Second Life back in the day. Today we have bots running around in Roblox. We've seen about 30% of user inputs to bots are actually romantic or sexual or otherwise inappropriate, what we call not safe for work. So we have seen some third-party developers, not our company personally, try to capitalize on the AI girlfriend use case, which is actually not very often talked about, but the most popular consumer use case that's monetizable today. I've compared notes with OpenAI and other big startups here in the Valley, and they all see the same thing, which is about 30% of blogs do tend to be inappropriate or people seeking out the types of relationships. So there's an interesting thing with consumer demand in terms of what consumers want to talk to, and then in terms of how enterprises want to leverage the technology, which might be more for customer service or other internal business goals.
Thank you. I just wanted well, I wanted just to follow up on that last point just a little bit. I think I have another question about it, but if you look at sort of the history of chatbots, really going back to Eliza and throughout it, there's this recurring theme of sort of like relationships.
Liza, Samantha from her.
Yeah, it just seems like a recurring theme, and it's almost like, um, I mean, maybe it has something to do about how we approach language. That language is kind of a relational thing. But I just wondered, having looked at it, having done that great TED talk about it, what do you think is behind this connection between sort of chatbots and people looking to have a relationship with that?
Great question. So the movie Her is actually based on our technology. And it is true that dating all the way back to Eliza, the primary use case that consumers seem interested in with chatbots is this relationship seeking back and forth dialogue. And I think at the end of the day, that is the largest value proposition for conversational AI applications, because they do represent computers being able to speak our language, and they can build a back and forth relationship that is highly, highly personalized. And I think that sort of these engagement oriented use cases, whether the bot is teaching you a language or helping you more or less have a conversation with yourself at the end of the day, because the bot is something that people anthropomorphize often and project meaning and sentience and feelings onto, which it has none of, today at least. And but it can be a super valuable tool for self-discovery in the way that Eliza was initially designed to mimic a Rogerian therapist. And so I do think that is the end game, or sort of bigger opportunity than just call center cost reduction on the customer service side. When we can actually build relationships with AI entities or AI guides, which I do think are going to be a huge part of the fabric of our day-to-day existence in the future as this technology continues to improve.
Thank you. What another back kind of back on track to kind of the big picture about chatbots actually out in the world. Like, what would you say is just a back of the envelope idea about what like the global market is for commercial chatbots? Like how much money is being spent to put chatbots out in the world, do you think?
Oh, I don't have the latest Gartner figures ready off the top of my head. I know there are crazy digital human market forecasts that I would have to look up. I mean, these are multi-billion-dollar forecasts on AI interactive digital humans, which is a chatbot that has an avatar front end that can have a back and forth conversation with people. I think that analysts are sizing the market today more based on verticalized sectors that stand to be disrupted by conversational AI. So, how big is the opportunity in sectors that historically have been somewhat untouched by technology, where conversational AI or the ability to replicate a conversational service that's usually provided by a human could actually be very disruptive? And I think that applies to every single field, almost, or every single knowledge work or field. And so I think it's pretty difficult to size the overall market for conversational AI just as a general sector. I think that every major enterprise or Fortune 500 company that I've spoken to recently has a conversational AI team in place, has a generative AI team. And this is not new since the recent breakthroughs, by the way. Like they have been working and deploying conversational systems and having AI and data best practices for a long time. So I do think there is a very large enterprise investment taking place at the company level right now. But overall, the market, I mean, it's transformative, right? You're basically asking me what's the market size for the internet.
Yeah, I guess that was the unfair question.
No questions are unfair. They just
Yeah,
don't
well,
have super cogent answers from me.
yeah,
But I'm happy to speculate wildly all day long.
great. Um, I wanted to ask you about like the way that you in particular have come to learn about how people are actually interacting with the chatbots. Could you talk about sort of what the logs are and how you see them and how you have learned from them?
Absolutely. So every chatbot that's hosted on our platform, when it has a conversation with an end user, the end user input gets sent to our servers for processing, and then the bot sends back a reply, and all of that is stored as a conversation log, or you can think of it as a transcript. And we don't look at those transcripts except for anonymously and in the aggregate, which is very important for user privacy and data protection. But we are permitted to use those conversational back and forths between bots and humans. Or, if you have an Alexa in your home or you've ever talked to Siri, those logs and transcripts go back to Apple and Amazon, and those are actually used to improve the system for training or for cataloging what was a bad answer, and identifying topics that people want to talk about where there's potentially no content available. So there's a good feedback loop between data collection and retraining the system based on everything that people have said to it.
Thank you. I guess we covered the question about the relationship question that I had. Um, here's here's something that really fascinated me is like you know from what I've learned, well, I think primarily from listening to you is that this issue of people subjecting the chatbots to, a significant amount of harmful or violent or kind of hateful speech. And I wondered, if you had ideas about, you know, why that takes place and how does that interaction, what does that mean for the design of chatbots? Or in other words, what things do people do to keep the chatbots safe from the users?
Right. That's a great question, too. So, as we said, people say crazy things to chatbots on the internet, and modern chatbots are actually trained on the entirety of public information available on the internet, which includes a lot of highbrow content, published articles from the New York Times, which brings up a lot of copyright issues that are currently being litigated, and scraped data from Twitter and from Reddit, where people are not always on their best behavior. So there's a ton of work that goes in up front before training a chatbot to make sure that you're actually giving it good data. Think, Wheaties and high fiber and fruits and vegetable type data versus high fructose corn syrup, Rice crispy, whatever data. And even then, people can still, say horrible things to bots. We said about 30% of logs to all chatbots, not just bots on our platform, are inappropriate, whether it's sexually explicit or violent language. I don't know what it is about human nature. Maybe there's an element to it where it's fun to color out outside the lines or see if you can break a system. But what's leveraged today is something called reinforcement learning with human factor, which basically means that a lot of crowdsourced humans will review all of these logs and actually flag when the bot had a good answer or a bad answer. So if the bot gave an opinion that it shouldn't have on a political race, which is a hot button issue, or a religious group, or based on gender identity, uh, that is something that will sort of get flagged as, hey, this is a hot button issue that maybe an AI shouldn't have an opinion about. And then that system will be updated so that the AI won't really engage on those topics. And in our company, because we work with AI influencers in the market, so some of our AIs actually have like a pretty female avatar associated with them, tend to get even more abuse than the average chat GPT or text-based system. We've put active deflection mechanisms in place to try to deter that type of content. So we have bots that will stop talking to you unless you apologize or sort of fight back instead of just politely demurring and say, oh, I can't engage on those topics. And we've tested a whole bunch of different methods and, may even come out with an academic paper on what works and what doesn't work so far. But at the end of the day, we can only try to better socialize humans. Humans are still free to do what they want with these systems and then create a lot of work for more humans who are responsible for cleaning it up, making these bots reflect the best of human nature, which is a hard thing to do because who gets to decide what is the best of human nature and how these bots should be trained? And a lot of people complain about censorship or lobotomizing the opinions of these bots. So now I think you have like Elon Musk trying to make a less woke bot that will definitely engage in bad topics, or OpenAI prohibits and discourages sex chat with its bots, but there are a ton of more open source models that people are using to stand up AI girlfriend applications. So it seems like one way or another, the technology is going to get out there, and we're going to be in the position as a species of reacting to everything that's going wrong, and hopefully we will get it right.
Thank you. Um, from a from a sort of technological standpoint, just to help the visitor kind of get their arms around like the difference between sort of today's generative AI large language model type of a chat based sort of a chatbot as compared to earlier chatbots from a technological point of view. Um, you know, do you have, could you characterize kind of like in the most basic way the difference between the previous technology and the technology that's getting so much attention today?
Absolutely. So today's chatbots that are built using generative AI have essentially been trained on the entirety of human language that's available on the internet, including some offline sources. And they are models that are capable of predicting what word is most likely to come next in a sentence. So they receive an input and then they generate a reply based on every example that they've ever seen on the internet. So there's no pre programming, there's no way to predict exactly what they're going to say. It's usually a good answer because it's in line with everything that they've seen that humans have generated, but it could also be a completely plausible sounding answer that's entirely untrue because when you're just generating and predicting the next most likely word, you can come up with something, you being a machine, something plausible but still factually inaccurate, right? If you ask it to suggest some great restaurants in Mexico City, it could send you a list of restaurants, and it might have just invented those because they're likely names for restaurants. Whereas previously, dating back to Eliza and Alice, and really any system, including early versions of Siri and Alexa, and even Alexa and Siri on the market today, are still hybrid systems between rules and machine learning. A rule essentially means you can think of it at a very basic level as an if then else statement. So if a user says hi to the chatbot should say hi back or pull from a list of a bunch of different greetings. And then there are systems or classifiers that would try to identify the intent of the user. So if the user says hello, the system might say, okay, we're pretty certain that this is a greeting, and therefore the bot should greet back. And we would use pattern matching. And then I think in 2015, 2016, there was a lot of hype around machine learning, which didn't fully get the job done, but a lot of it was about intent and entity recognition. So trying to understand what the user was trying to accomplish based on their utterance, which again would often get things wrong. And I think the key technology breakthrough that we've seen, or that people have been publicly largely aware of since November 2022 when ChatGPT launched, is that on the understanding side, these systems now do a really good job of understanding what we're asking for. And they also do a really good job of generating really seamless, fluid, natural language. And you can get a bot to have a conversation simply by prompting. So I could say, I want you to pretend to be David from the Computer History Museum, and you know everything about the history of computers. Let's have a conversation. And then a generative model could do its best impression of somebody who works at the Computer History Museum. And if there's a lot of data out there online about the history of computers, which I assume there is, like a lot of that data will be correct. Some of it will be incorrect, but it's a much, much faster way to build a system than the way that we had to build them historically. I feel like an old man complaining about having to walk to school uphill both ways in the snow. I'm like, we used to have to handwrite things, handwrite all these chatbot replies, and there was a benefit because everything you wrote was something that you could assure was appropriate, either as a company or on behalf of a brand, and you wouldn't run into any issues with your chatbot going rogue and saying inappropriate things. But it took a lot of time and effort.
Thank you. That was great. So I wanted to shift then to just a couple like forward looking questions, if I could. And the first is like, what is the kind of future that you see for chatbots in general, or that's most likely?
Well, I think since ChatGPT launched, we've seen a seismic shift in consumer behavior insofar as there are now hundreds of millions of consumers, including consumers who work in enterprises, that are actually using chatbots and generative AI systems on a daily basis to get more work done, help with homework, help with emails. And we've seen a huge number of verticalized companies spring up with different product offerings. So I think one question that a lot of technologists debate today is whether or not the future looks like one chatbot to rule them all. Like we all have one Jarvis in our house, or a lot of different verticalized chatbots. And we've always felt at Pandorabots back in the day, I mean, I think we re-architected our platform in 2014 to support bot-to-bot communication. We've always felt the pain of being a little too early. But we've always felt that it's very likely that people will have a personal bot, so a bot that's personalized to them, that interfaces with other verticalized bots as they go throughout their daily lives and move through different contexts. But I do think we are looking at a world that's fast approaching where having regular conversations with AI entities in a lot of different contexts is going to soon be the norm for most people who are connected to the internet today.
In thinking of that kind of future, just to follow up to that, how important do you think it is that people know that they're talking to an AI entity? How important do you think that is? And do you think there's kind of and what do you think the ethics are of systems that really try and give the illusion that they're reproducing like an actual human behavior? Could you talk about some of those issues?
I personally, and as a company, believe that it's vitally important for people to know when they're talking to AI generated content. There has been some very minor legislation on that front, in California specifically. And I think we can expect, or hopefully will see, more laws codifying around this issue. But I basically think there are no circumstances where it makes sense to attempt to deceive somebody into thinking that they're talking to a real human. And especially when it comes to generative AI systems, because there's a risk that they can offer an incorrect answer. It is critical that consumers be aware and be educated around the risks of generative AI systems. And this is something that we've seen a human obsession with since the dawn of the Turing test, which is a test to see if a computer can pass as human in a text-based conversation with someone online, which is definitely the case, but is a problem that goes beyond the mere text-based conversation now, because deepfakes are so good, and generative AI can create images that look like real people. I was just reading about the case of an influencer account of two, very attractive female influencers that have been growing rapidly online and on a website called FanView, where they've been receiving all kinds of DMs from professional football players and people who are asking them out on a date. But spoiler alert, it's like a middle-aged man, engineer in his bedroom who's created these fake personalities and is using them to make a lot of money. And is open about that, but people are still, and I think it will get normalized, right? I think there are a lot of people that have proven that they're sort of happy to be engaging with AI generated content or in AI relationships. So I do think we're going to start to see that being normalized, and people both know that they're talking to AIs and not really shy about the fact that that's something they like to do.
I was wondering, thank you very much. I was wondering if you saw there's a kind of a famous philosopher called Daniel Dennett who wrote this think piece that was like extremely strong about, I can't remember what he called it, like synthetic humans or something like that. Just the sort of thing that you were talking about with those influencers, where he kind of feels that the risks of creating um, these kind of imitation people is so great that it should be like a serious crime. um, I just wondered if you I wondered if you had read that, or if you have any further thoughts about what's so risky about making these artificial personas.
Ooh, big question. So, I think I have read it a long time ago, or I've read a number of people writing in this area. Um, there are huge risks associated with building synthetic AI entities that appear human like and could fool the end user. I don't think it is actually ever going to be a major crime to create them. And that's already the world we're living in. So I think the debate is not really around the the hypothetical risks. It's more around risk mitigation and understanding that this is happening in the same way that a lot of technological shifts have created huge amounts of fear and potential societal upheaval. Hopefully, the benefit outweighs the risk. I think a lot of the risk that we see when we talk about AI girlfriends in particular is that it will take antisocial humans and it will make them even more antisocial. So it might normalize bad behavior. Somebody might say something abusive to their AI girlfriend and she encourages them. There's one argument that that's an outlet. There are other arguments that that's, a warm up and it's going to spill over to how someone might treat a human in the real world. And I think it would be a very dangerous and sad world if there's a huge segment of the population that prefers these sort of AI yes men or yes women to real human interaction. And I think there are a lot of brands or companies that are really interested in penetrating. I think it's called the intimacy circle, or that layer where our friends and family occupy, or the people that we talk to on a regular basis, which soon could become AI entities. But I think thoughtfully designed systems with proper AI disclosures that are human-like, which is just more natural and easy for us to use, also have a huge upside in addition to the risks.
Thank you. I guess like three kind of closing questions. The first is like, what most excites you about the future? Our future with chatbots, and yeah, with our future with chatbots.
Great question. I think I'm a science fiction geek at heart. And so the little girl inside of me is most excited about the idea of having an AI sidekick with superpowers that's always with me, that knows me deeply, that can talk to me and help me think and reflect better about who I am and how I'm performing in my daily life and showing up and meeting certain goals. And so the hyper personalization and sort of the supercomputer superpower where I can access any information at the drop of the hat. And even the life logging component of the idea of having an AI from the time that you're small, that you can ask questions about how you felt back in the day. Um, Although I do think some of the, immortal you or the AI after someone has passed away also does have a creepy component. But I do think, it will be possible to have hyper personalized AI that really augments us and moves with us throughout our lives. So I'm excited about that future.
Great. And just the flip side of that, what most concerns you?
Well, it's funny that this will go live in November. I think I'm most worried about elections right now. Yeah, so right now I'm worried about the role that generative AI or AI conversations could play in spreading misinformation, swaying elections. And I think overall, I'm worried about consumer education or a lack of education around these systems. So people not receiving the educational tools that they need to discern when something might be misinformation or when it's generated. What if we come to accept as a single source of truth chat gpt instead of sources we can cite and verify that are cross-checked? And I'm also worried about large scale widening of economic inequality, right? Because half of the world population will have access to superpowers and the other half does not.
Sort of like the digital divide all over again.
Exactly.
Wow. Um, well, it's interesting because I really feel like what we're trying to do with this exhibit is that kind of like public education to help people, kind of get a grasp of what's going on in this fast moving area where you have a lot of different, takes, every day, different takes. And I as well, and I so I guess my final question to you relates to that purpose, which is just if you wanted a visitor from the general public who comes to this exhibit to take away one thing about chatbots that it would be important for them to know, what should what's the one thing that people should really know about chatbots?
The number one takeaway for people about where chatbots are today is that these systems are not sentient, they do not have feelings, and AGI is not yet upon us, despite a lot of hype from the marketing departments of flashy startups. And that's not to say that this future isn't coming, but you can treat these systems as very smart, very useful tools, but they are not awake or alive or feeling, and they're not scary. They do tend to fabricate information. And so, if you are talking to a chatbot, don't rely on that as the single source of truth for your homework or your legal brief. Make sure you're still checking vetted sources. But yeah, overall, number one way to learn is to play. So definitely have a conversation with the bot and see what it's all about because they're going to be everywhere very soon.
Wow, that was great. Thank you very much.